So what are you doing?
Nothing.
Nothing? Why not?
Trying to get on this Lifestyle Radio website.
Sounds like a cool website.
Yeah, it's alright. Oh, wait, I might have it.
You might have it.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
The opinions expressed during this show are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of their associated organizations or Lifestyle Radio.
Good evening. I'm Coulter Wokcik. I'm already into the 420, damn it.
You like music, you like weed, well, we gonna be good friends indeed. This is how much I like more than smoking trees. They'll make you dance the do-si-do and teach you how the chiva grows. Smoke a bowl on the 420 radio show. On Lifestyle Radio.
Come on, sing it, Marcel. Sing it. Sing it, Marcel. You don't sing anymore with me, buddy.
Radio. No, because I had a glass of scotch.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you.
So this is the 420 radio show. We're live at Gungeonistas, 242 King Street East in Hamilton, Ontario. If you want to come in and smoke one, please do. You can also listen to us at lifestyleradio.net or 420radio.ca or live on Spreaker and a whole bunch of other places I don't feel like mentioning. I'm here with my buddy Marcel, and Mary Jane isn't with us today. She's at Weedstock, Cannabis Living something. I'm not sure. I don't have any information. And Kobe's barking in the background. I've gone from being cooped up in an apartment, guys, to being in the public. So, yeah. So today we are continuing our conversation with Dennis. Please say your last name.
Petke.
And
it's like instead of pet rock, it's like a pet key.
We had this conversation last week too.
I think we did.
And
I'm not saying a word.
And Peter is joined us from Pharmagreen. He is the CEO and director of Pharmagreen. And we'll get into what Pharmagreen is as well. What's your last name, Peter? Wokcik?
Wojcik. Polish heritage.
Wojcik.
Yes.
You're not very good on these name thing, right?
No, man. I'm not. No, because that's my dyslexia, though, right?
But see, with a name like mine, you learn to pronounce everybody's names.
Yeah, but giggles, that's always what I think first, and then I gignac. Get it?
And that's wrong.
No, I know. It's Janak.
Yeah.
Right? Janak. I mean, you've told me it right so many times, it's kind of in there. But it took me a while.
If you look at it, it doesn't look the way it sounds. Or, you don't read it the way it sounds.
And it's actually French.
Really?
What is
his last name?
Your last name?
Giggles.
Oh, his last name is, I think you're Irish, aren't you, Peter?
No, we're talking about Marcel.
Wojcik's a good Irish name.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I always just default to Irish just to throw people off. Actually, Peter's got an interesting story. Oh, Petke is also Polish/German.
Yeah,
so that's why. It might have been even Petrovich at one time. Who knows? And then they shortened it up. It's possible. So Peter has an interesting story. So, Peter, you were born in Poland, but then you lived in Croatia for a while or something?
No, I actually kind of globe-traveled through the world. We left while Poland was communist, and we ended up in Libya. Africa under Gaddafi, martial law came about in the late 70s. So we scootled out of there on a midnight plane, winded up in Italy for a couple of weeks. We were going to say hello to the Pope, but unfortunately there was an assassination on his life, so those meetings got canceled. Winded up in Sweden, and asylum was given to Polish individuals because of the martial law. But we were already on a prompt ship to Germany, and there was no choice. It was us and 5,000 other passengers. Winded up in Hamburg, living in Germany, Hamburg, around the St. Paul's area. So I kind of grew up from the strictest, call it cultural representations to very loose in the windows on the way to school. So, it was quite interesting upbringing, that's for sure.
So, Peter, while you're talking about yourself, we had the pleasure of having, excuse me, this is a cannabis show.
Sounds like you're having a good one.
Anyways, we had the pleasure of having Dennis on the show last week. Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your business and why you're here? And I'll mute my mic.
What got me really started in the industry, come from a medical family background, was basically about a decade ago, mother was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer that spread to the bone. And I already knew cannabis had its medical properties way back when, just from personal experience. So I sent down some raw product down to my father. He's still a practicing cardiologist. And anyways, he comes home, mother on the couch with her legs up, stoned like crazy, father calling me Antichrist. He goes, listen, this isn't medicine. I said, yes, it is. We just got to maybe administer in different forms. So that led me to doing extracts and particularly working with THC and stage 4 individual cancers and people in debilitating pain as I introduced CBD and THC and the whole effects of entourage. And, you know, I've been having, call it on a philanthropic effort, never charged for these research, but very, very high efficacy rate in using cannabis as THC for the treatment of tumors, as well as more CBD for the inflammation side. And that's where the research on the CBD dana came that I started 4 years ago. On the personal side, what got me into the industry, and then in 2013, 14, I had the pleasure through Stan Fittis to be introduced to Tommy Chong. We brought him on board. Had a little bit of setback with the municipalities back then, not being sure whether or not to allow the and then PRs back then. So today we've got a new project on a piece of land that was all the geotechnicals were passed. The board of FBRD passed the resolution to allow the construction of that. So it brought us into a really special relationship, strategic partner with Alliance, where we're able to, position ourselves as a public company, which I'll talk about later, but also to do the preliminary pre-construction work for the project. So it was a very pivotal relationship between the companies. And what we're building is really a one-of-a-kind center in Canada, basically in North America, which we call the Cannabis Biotech Complex. And the goods and services that we'll be offering is completely complementary, not only to the licensed producers, but also to the agriculture sector as a whole. The primary service is providing tissue-cultured starter plantlets. I think Dennis mentioned a little bit on that before, but basically the benefits of that is no diseases, no bugs. Whether you make 1 or 1 trillion of them, there's no genetic drift. So if you're looking medical or high-grade, even retail cannabis, as long as your cultivating schedules don't change or you basically have a sunny day every day, and you start with super plantlets like that, then that's how you basically produce a very high-quality product. So tissue culture technology has been around for 40 years. We as a company really bring a lot of recent innovation to the tissue culture technology as a whole. There's 4 stages to micropropagation. We can do it in 3. So basically we can produce more plants in less space and less time. So we're one of the largest to be building 1 million plantlets per month supply to the licensed producers. And we already have plans to expand that into double in year 2 to do 2 million per month. Some of the other services we're bringing is live storage of strains. How basically do you store a strain? Well, you have to have the seed is one, but then again, male, female, genetic drift. You don't know if it's the dominant, and also through mother stock. But mother stocks, again, it's live plant, gets old as human beings. So it's not, call it a continuous best way unless you replicate the mom, which again, you can have genetic drift and subject it to diseases and bugs. So We can do it through tissue culture technology. So basically something that we may grow in a baby jar in 2 weeks, we can make that grow over a year's period. So basically we're preserving the genetics. We call also this facility kind of recession proof, because basically today is cannabis, tomorrow maybe it's vanilla or something else as the world climate sort of changes. But that's how we're constructing with very modern technologies using LEDs, top-of-the-line fertigation system, sensors for measuring runoffs and so forth. The other very important aspect that what makes us special to licensed producers is that, yes, we don't compete with them, and we also increase their bottom line. When they buy the plantlets from us, they're guaranteed no bugs, no diseases, and all the genetics will be the same, whether I give them 10,000 or 10 million plantlets, so they can guarantee it on that consistent, reliable supply. Usually a good grower takes about 20% of their grow space to be used for mothers and clones, which again carries those undesirable differences between that and tissue culture. So getting a supply from us, they can increase their production by 20%, and more importantly, increase their cultivating schedules. What I mean by that, usually because of lack of supply of a consistent large number of plantlets, most growers opt to grow the plants in cycles that are called 4 to 6 months long. And what I mean by that is basically the vegetative state. So before you begin flowering and producing the bud, the plant is growing under 18 hours of light, and that period really depends. It's usually the plant always double when you're ready to switch it to 12 hours, which we call the flowering cycles. So the more you veg the plant, the bigger it gets, and you're basically utilizing one plant in more space. But like I mentioned, so you're vegetating for 2 months plus, you flip and then into flower, depending on the strain, from 8 to 12 weeks, and you're winding up with production cycles that are every 5 or 6 months. In the case of having such a supply, you basically can reduce the vegetative cycle to a week or 10 days, 12 days max, and then you flip it into flower, and all you see is a seal green with these big colas sitting on the table, and that's what we call in today's market quad-type quality of a product. And you're growing that from a consistent supply of these super starter plantlets. So that's the competitive advantage. And anybody who's been even, overall as a grower really recognizes that if you have that ability, you will constantly move, and you can be better adjusted to the market and strain demand, because that way your growth cycles are a lot smaller and you can see what sells, what doesn't, and again gives you another competitive advantage. So basically that's the services for the grower, where we give them the super starter plantlets. We can off-site storage of strains of theirs, which is basically like a secured strain bank. We also do research and development on growing schedules for the different strains. So we're basically dialing into the plant, and whether the grower is a THC grower or CBD grower, hydroponics, dirt, we can give them a growing schedule, basically eliminating the guesswork out of growing. So if he's growing, let's say, a Death Baba or a rock star, we'll give him the actual optimal schedule, how to properly feed the plant in his growth cycle. So, that's where what makes us very complementary and one-of-a-kind business for the licensed producers, whether that be domestic or international, with the CBD. We also plan to do DNA testing for the certification of plant species. There's really no such commercial services in Western Canada. So that will be desired services for the overall for the agriculture sector. And then lastly, we kind of did some research on our CBD Dana, which is really important to notice that it's really particular strain, that it's very high in CBD at 14%. We stabilize the genetics, call it through tissue culture, and it's less than 0.3% THC. So as the THC market is domestic, CBD is international, and United States Farm Bill passed basically states that any CBD sales should be derived from industrial hemp. Well, CBD dana, because of the less than 0.3% THC, qualifies as industrial hemp. So we've been fending calls, on an international basis, asking for supply of these plantlets because of its specifics. And another topic we can engage in, I'll get Dennis in, that's basically, I can describe to you the farming of CBD and the benefits of using tissue cultured female and what a great revenue model that is compared to doing it from seed, and you have pollination, and seeds are only good for omega-3s and 6s. As you know, the CBD or the cannabinoids, THCs are all produced in the female part of the plant. So there's definitely a benefit to farming from high CBD strain, all female plantlets. But basically, that's another topic. On the topic of Pharmagreen Biotech Center, that's what we plan to do, be a global tissue culture company.
Yeah, Peter, I just wanted to ask you something to confirm, because Marcel and I talked about it briefly last week, and it's the legality of being able to sell a CBD product from hemp right now. Apparently, it was still, Marcel was saying that it was still listed as a Schedule 1 somewhere. I can't remember that conversation, Marcel.
Yes.
I would still listed as a Schedule 1 on the Controlled Drugs and Substance Act.
Yeah, so basically what, in Canada, what's the holy grail, call it, of the whole licensing and being in the business is having the ACMPR license. Because even under industrial hemp, you can produce, now Health Canada says you can keep the flower, where before you had to till it back on the earth and you only kept the stalks for fibers, which isn't really a developed industry. And then you kept the seeds, call it from hemp hards, where you were pressing omega-3s and 6s, the oils out of it. So now we can keep the flower, but you're not allowed to sell it except to an ACMPR holder. And then the ACMPR holder can develop oils from it or further formulations. But that's kind of the chain, as I understand it, with current Health Canada licensing.
Yes, and because technically, I don't think you were allowed to sell it to ACMPR until the 17th of October. But the problem is, the issue that we have is everybody thinks CBD is legal and that it can be sold in any corner store. And we have places out there doing exactly that, selling products that they're claiming have CBD. Whether or not they actually do, I don't know.
See, because the biggest difference is in the United States, CBD is not a controlled substance, where in Canada it always has been. So even legalization did happen, but its sale is still restricted and controlled. So the production cycles, call it quality assurance, is controlled by Health Canada, and the sale of it is controlled by the provinces through their distribution stores, or some of them are retail direct. So I agree with you. CBD, just because of legalization, is not just, it's still a controlled substance in terms of reselling it. So it has some restrictions on it. But as far as I understand it, the ACMPR holders can purchase the industrial hemp, or they can grow strains themselves, let's say whatever percentage of CBD, THC, and when you're doing extractions and then, distillations and formulations later, it doesn't really make a difference if you're doing industrial hemp or if you're doing it from an actual, call it marijuana plant. It does matter, though, for the U.S. market that the origins come from industrial hemp for the CBD.
Yeah. That's the issue around CBD in Canada.
Sounds like an issue.
So that's, I guess the good thing about that is being the less than 0.3%, obviously it can be sold globally.
Yeah, the strain still has to be registered, call it, as an industrial hemp. So there's a process for that. But once you do have it registered, industrial hemp is not controlled around on the global scale, as is obviously the movements of THC products. So it's, and that's the biggest world phenomena. THC, call it, is great, retail market really picking up the consumption. Canada, California being of the two of their largest cannabis markets overall. California is a pretty big market, tops in the top 5 already on its own. So I think, that's the THC side, but the CBD side is seriously, 1,000 times, if not 10,000 times larger, because it's non-psychoactive component of the plant, and the medical benefits we can talk about all day. Only thing my comment is on that is entourage effect. Israelis tabled that in the 1960s. From my 10-year research with individuals, absolutely. For example, some of the research we have, if you're just purely consuming CBD, your body can only consume so much. Rest is excreted through your organs, like a vitamin D. So there's a lot of waste to begin. And the other thing is what we call negative loop back. So if you're consuming pure CBD, within 3 or 4 months, your endocannabinoid receptors, it affects it, and it starts not being as a positive result as if you would combine it with THC as well as CBD. And of course, we can do ratios because CBD negates the effects of THC, so there's no psychotropic effects, but basically you're getting the medicinal value of the whole plant. And I think that's the difference between when we discuss perhaps medical and recreational. Recreational, we look for the THC psychotropic effects, and when we discuss medical, we want the medical benefits without feeling the THC effects. So that's kind of the products I always support, is more so not as opposed to extracted and distilled. Why extracting all the goods and then trying to put back together? To my opinion, it's a needle in the haystack. A lot of medicine or trials need to be done in that space. The plant is best consumed as a whole, and then finding the appropriate sort of perhaps ratios of THC to CBD, depending on what an individual is looking for. So.
Exactly.
Well, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
And
I was going to say, I wanted
every word of it.
Well, see that now, like I was explaining, we have this strategic relationship with Pharmagreen. So Pharmagreen is the one that's building the center, the biotech center on what we call the cannabis biotech complex. We call it a complex because it's going to have the tissue culture center, if you will, which will have the other services that Peter mentioned. Plus, there's an expansion. Plus, we're going to be adding a extraction lab, and then we're going to have is it 5 acres of greenhouses, right, Peter?
Actually, I was going to say, don't call it a lab anymore, Dennis. Lab to me is call it like, you want to make a few chocolate bars. What we're after is actually an extraction plant. A lot of individuals talk about growing thousands of acres of CBD hemp, but nobody really, in my opinion, is discussing the resources it really takes even after you grow it. So that's what we're building, is a $20 million extraction and distillation plant, not a lab.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So,
because what Peter's trying to say. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to mention for, interest take on the radio, I've been asked before, well, how do you see, Peter, if somebody asks you, to produce 1 million pounds of raw biomass, call it, or CBD biomass, and what the resources would take? Well, basically, I did a model based on a plant that was 14% CBD, not 1. So you already have a 14% increase in your yield just by using the right strain. And then using female plant that's planted in the field, not call it from seed. We've looked at models where companies offer you feminized seeds and all that, but basically you're putting through a lot of stress factors. There's no guarantee. I like to hear from a company that can guarantee you 100% feminized seeds. All it takes is, to screw up the project is how many males, Dennis? Not a lot, right? Emails does it take to screw up a good field of production? Not a lot.
It's always the males that screw things up.
Yeah, so,
one male.
Yeah, well, when you do it from seed, you get a ratio, call it usually, of males, females, even or even feminized seeds have 1 or 2% of males in it. So the males pollinate the female, and then the female, so you got 50-50, you're already losing in your field ratio due to the males being present. And then the females get pollinated, 80% of the flower turns into seed. Seed is only good for omega-3s and 6s. We've been using it in our salads for 100 years, even out of fish oils. So it's really destroys the whole model, my opinion, of producing CBD and being very successful. Now, if you want to produce 1 million pounds of raw biomass, I did a modeling where you take 330 acres of completely irrigated, not from the top, because any water which contains, naturally molded spores in the air, combines and starts to destroy your flower component. And then you would basically use, for example, 50-plus people. You'd plant the female plantlets. So you got to have the supply of the female plantlets. Tissue culture, you can, ensure production in hundreds of thousands or millions. Plus, then you also need the right strain. So like a 14% CBD, less than 0.3, you're producing it as industrial hemp. So the sale of it becomes a lot more international as opposed to producing marijuana plants. And then you would use, during planting, about 50 people going crazy, just like tree seedlings, kind of planting season. And then at the end, you would need probably about a good 150 people so you can cultivate that within a good couple of weeks, because it's a completely different method of farming than farming for industrial hemp farming. And, people always been asking me, what is actually CBD farming compared to industrial hemp? Well, industrial hemp, you take it to late season. You just chop the plant from the field, let it dry. Flower is just basically, it biodegrades, becomes mold and so forth. But the seeds harden and they're not subjected to these, colder temperatures at the end of the season. So, and for CBD farming, you're not taking it to the very late season. For optimal CBD, you would want to take it down a bit sooner than you would for the seed. So if you want to be a successful CBD farmer, you basically certainly want to take a look at, buying these plantlets, not from seed, and then you're going to get into a business modeling of revenues that's really worth the millions. Because, some people say, well, Peter, if you want to charge $10 a plantlet, you can buy a bag of seeds, for $60 a kilo or whatever that is. But I told them is, good luck in farming CBD out of 1% seed. And, really you're basically farming for seed, not for CBD. It's business model.
And so that was so a couple of things coming out of that, just to pull it together, is so what Peter had the idea of was initially we do 200,000 of the disease-free genetically perfect female only of that CBD Dana strain, and then I believe we take it to the nursery to grow them a little bit bigger, and then we do a contract arrangement with a hemp farmer and to turn those 200,000 plants when they grow into 100,000 kilos of biomass. Is that correct? 100,000?
Yeah, that was one of the models based on farming on 20 acres, what you would basically produce, and then the 100,000 kilos would give you about 3,000 kilos of 99%, I guess, pure CBD isolate or crystals. CBD oil above 80% turns into solid. And then I think, what we have a very global competitive advantage, even for CBD farming, I think in Canada, is because of the restrictions by Health Canada. I wouldn't say restrictions, is basically the strict SOP that they put in place. Might be a pain in the ass to get into the business and quite costly in terms of licensing submissions that I think way too onerous, but that's another conversation. But I think it also guarantees quality of the CBD oils produced by Canadian farmers and the certifications that can be placed on them because of Health Canada's requirements. And that, to me, is medical grade. Can I give you an example that I know of? Is, a lot of industrial hemp is produced in China, but China doesn't really produce it for CBD. They use it for land reclamation. Their soils are quite heavily laden with trace metals and so forth. And, industrial hemp is also really good for cleaning that up. And inadvertently, they also produce in the flower the CBD. They don't have a strict, call it, requirements as we do here in Canada. So they're able to extract that CBD oils. Some of it goes through Eastern Europe, relabeled, repackaged, and mixed to North American markets. But that's certainly not medical grade CBD, in my opinion. And it's not. That's another.
Sorry to interrupt you, but what I wanted to tie together was the rationale for having, not calling the extraction facility a lab to actually it's more of a facility is because the problem with the model of start with 200,000 plants, end up with 100,000 kilos of biomass, and that 100,000 kilos of biomass is going to be extracted and distilled and turned into 3,000 kilos of 99% pure crystallite. But the problem, what people don't think about, and Peter will speak to this better than I will, is you have to have quite the facility to process all that. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of your product. So that's the rationale for having a bigger. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's like, it's live. It's called a plant. It biodegrades. It has a shelf life. So, you store it for 6 months. It's not the same quality. Simple example to lettuce. Leave your lettuce laying around for 6 months, see how edible it is at that time. You also, through storage, remember, large amounts of it, you basically can be creating a composting environment just in your storage bins alone. So, basically everybody's talking about, well, I got Colombia, I got Canada, whatever you want to call it, on a national scale. We're all going to be farming this great, CBD production, but nobody really realizes the resources you need on the back end to, even if you're successful producing that biomass, you better be able to, yes, turn it into oils, which gives you a lot longevity,
quickly,
life.
So
very quickly.
So the extraction and distillation facility that we're setting up at the complex there, what's its capacity going to be?
Well, this is I'm looking to process basically the idea of, using a modeling of 1 million pounds of raw biomass. So we're still looking, depending, basically to process something like that, call it 3 months or less. And, that to me is the kind of top shelf life in terms of span on your biomass. You don't want to keep it any longer. You can process it all in that period. I think you'll get the best results. So that would be the numbers we're shooting for.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to pull together again, and I'm kind of repeating myself, but obviously that's the whole point of this, is so when Alliance is going to have accumulated 30% interest in that entire complex, and therefore whatever revenues come out of there, we also get 30% of that. And also, of course, ownership of 30% of the property. So that's why I wanted to kind of bring it back to what we're talking about, the companies, how do they make money, all that stuff. And another thing, too, is so since I've repeated that, now I don't know if you're done with the CBD Dennis strain, but maybe you want to talk a little bit about what Pharmagreen, the public company, is doing, or maybe you can't speak to that. I don't know. Is it if stuff hasn't been out there in the public?
So, because of our strategic, relationship and exactly how you defined it, Dennis, that's what our relationship is. And Alliance has been very pivotal in supplying the first initial capital to get the pre-construction going. So basically, we had to go through geotechnical submissions out in Desroches. We've got unanimous approvals from the board to move forward. So, that kind of funding was very pivotal. And so it will be as we obviously get into the construction phase of the project. And it also allowed us to prepare Pharmagreen as a public company listing in the United States. I believe there's big advantages of listing in U.S. PHBI is our symbol. Anybody wants to look it up, we're still call it the early stage, very early tier on the pink sheet. We're filing in S1 in December sometime, and we plan to move our listing onto the QB. And from there, we look to be listed on the NASDAQ exchange, just like Tilray. And I think our valuation models will be, are a lot stronger in the United States. It basically comes down to fundamentals. It's a much larger market with a much, call it larger exposure. So I think that was, a lot of the reasoning behind our decision to list Pharmagreen in the United States.
Yeah, and because Pharmagreen obviously has the burden of the larger portion of the facility. So Pharmagreen has to come up with 70% of the project, which is it's getting over 20 million now. And so to be able to raise, I mean, you guys know this obviously, but to be able to raise like 20 million in the U.S., I'm not going to say anything's easy, but it certainly is a lot easier than in Canada, unless you're already like a bigger player, like Canopy or what have you. But so and you've actually had quite a bit of success there, right, Peter, with getting some groups interested in
yes. So we're definitely call it in late stage discussions about putting this together. We have an offering done kind of for the larger funds. We're doing it $2 a share for 10 million shares. That's what we have kind of going on with some of the interested parties down in the States. And then really everybody sees our model is, one thing is we don't compete with more growing space with the LPs. We have these strategic relationships such as with Alliance and others for supply. So we're a value-added company, for the service, for the licensed producers. And we bring a lot of intellectual property that we haven't talked about much that Pharmagreen really has in this industry. One of them is, our Chief Operations Officer, Dr. Fazia Afrine. She taught graduate students in Japan with Chiba University on indoor cultivation, CO2 augmentation, tissue culture methodology. She has a patent for substrate use along with the Chiba University. She's done, global published journal articles, well over 60 on an international basis. And she brings her Chiba Afrine proprietary process of micropropagation, which is I would say a revolutionary advancement for the whole tissue culture industry as a whole. We also bring in the development of protocols for different cannabis strains. And, just to say, our facility is also designed in a proprietary manner. We call it one-directional flow to eliminate the possibility of contamination. When you're designing these clean room lab facilities, that's why the costs are, when you're doing pharmaceutical grade, a lot higher than your regular buildings. And in our case, we'll have 2 to 3 or 4 million, different stages of tissue culture plantlets on the shelf. And any contamination in the facility is an automatic loss of your products. So it has to be really designed with quite the care and ingenuity and engineering on this size of facilities. So we also bring the design, which is proprietary, to the industry, protocols which we have been developing with Dr. Afrine for the last 3-4 years as well, into the industry. Cold storage, or the service of live storage of strain, is another proprietary factor that we bring to the industry. So we welcome all calls from LPs who would look to have their strain stored in a stored facility, and also we can develop protocols for them for future development of tissue culture plantlets. So it really is kind of a one-of-a-kind model, and our employment is rather large. So we plan to, in the 63,000 square foot Desroches site, just phase 1, which is the tissue culture and the services we described earlier, we'll be employing anywhere between 80 to 100 people. If within first year of operations, we're already looking at, being at full capacity of 1 million a month. So we're looking at expansion to another 1 million plantlets per month within year 2, as well as to build out our extraction and distillation plant, and then take a look at the greenhouses. So we're, for the region and the amount of employment, and we will be better pay rate than just a regular greenhouse job, because it is lab type environment and, a little bit more of a skill set required. So I think it's overall a win-win, and I think we're a showcase for on an international basis in terms of what we're doing as a company and what we can do on any scale on a global level. I mean, one thing to mention maybe doesn't have much. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Peter. I just wanted to ask something. That's going to be two things. I'll let you finish your thought there, but I didn't want to forget. I wanted you to, after this next question, is to just maybe give your thoughts on what happened when we did those road shows across Canada. But before that, I was going to ask you to repeat something. So you said Dr. Afreen has like 60 publications that she's...
Don't exactly quote me. I haven't looked at Curriculum Vitae for a long time, but she has quite a handful of publications, yes.
So here's the thing. The point we're trying to make, Al and Marcel, is that, so yes, this is obviously, Alliance is an early stage company. You can say Pharmagreen's an early stage company, but we do have the expertise required to pull this off, to do what we say we're going to do. And Dr. Afreen had actually trained at the Sheba University, and that's why the name got created for the proprietary technology, is the Sheba Afreen. The Sheba Afreen, the method of doing the tissue culture plantlets, which is different. So my next question was, when we were on those road trips, because I don't think you went to Calgary with me, but we did some in Vancouver, we did Montreal, we did Toronto, and then we went Toronto back again. What was your experience? Well, what were they telling us about other people doing anything even remotely close or on this scale?
Well, I must say, we probably visited, Dennis, together anywhere 30 plus brokerage firms, fund managers, from senior level and all that. Yeah. High net worth. And number one question we always had is basically, who else is doing this tissue culture? There's one really company, but nobody's doing it on the scale we are, or with the ability or describing the technologies and the goods and services like we are. So that's what everybody noticed. And I think you remember the one broker that was real, described everybody else, where, we sat down to the meeting, and first 10 minutes, he couldn't stop telling us how if you're another ACMPR, how the money has dried up. You're basically like everybody else. If you are, no need to go further. Let's just go on our way and call it a good meeting. And then after we pulled out the combined, call it business plan, and basically described it like we are on air right now, it totally turned into a different conversation.
Oh, it changed that whole meeting. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're not going to mention the name of this other
value-added project for the industry, and one of a kind, right? So.
Hey, Al, you've been kind of quiet, and same with Marcel. No questions?
I'm just sitting back listening. No, you're answering them all.
That's actually a good thing. Well, actually, there's another thing that I wanted to mention was that what Peter and I have done is we've made a deal. We worked something out with Elon Musk, with SpaceX, and we'll be growing cannabis in space. I'm kidding. I'm joking. But what I wanted to... I was waiting for Marcel to go, really? I'm just trying to, liven it up a little bit. But the one thing that what we wanted to say was that although it's a Canadian facility, obviously we intend to do other facilities in other countries. But even for the time being, to be able to ship the plants and the plantlets, and so that they live and they don't degrade or anything. Peter's also been working with Philips, and I think, didn't you say Philips was actually going to do something?
Philips was for the lighting. I mean, we have other companies. I'm just kind of giving some kudos. It's PL Lighting, Canadian company. A lot of LPs work with them. I'm very impressed with their technology, even for LED lighting for the tissue culture. So we have, call it 2 or 3 different choices of LED companies that we obviously are doing a mock-up facility out in the mission area, just so we could test all the equipment prior to implementation in the main facility design. But yeah, for the shipment, we have, again, that's another proprietary technology of ours in shipping them in specially designed crates, insulated with LED lighting. So basically, that's a big issue of transport. As you know, the number one issue is basically it's a very fragile plant. So any shocks to it, you might not see, right away the plant dies. You might see it 2 weeks or a month later, where it will be totally different growth and not, just because of the shocks, usually cold. which experiences, but also lighting. So basically, if you leave for 48 hours or so a small clone, or I shouldn't call it a clone, or a tissue culture plantlet in darkness, that's what trips it, by the way, what we call the photoperiod, where the plant, that's why naturally when you grow it outdoors, you see in the spring up to midsummer, the plant just basically glows bigger, but it doesn't develop the flower. Then the light period starts to change from the longest period to the shortest, and that's how the plant changes into the flower production. Well, basically, when you're doing kind of more controlled, like through tissue culture and delivery of plantlets, like I mentioned, 48 hours plus in the darkness, and the grower will notice 2 weeks later that he's got a little thumbnail bud because they've already started flowering on him, or worst case yet, he turns it back under 18 hours light and totally confuses the plant where it is. So that's a big part of our services as well, is to make sure not only we can, grow these plantlets, give the schedules, but ensure successful delivery to the client. So
yeah,
that's
and another thing. And sorry, just to add to that before I forget, because apparently a bunch of us on this call have ADHD, but so we're also working with a couple of different companies. Like you guys probably know Al and Marcel. Peter is aware of this, that there are a bunch of these different companies coming out with this blockchain technology for logistics tracking. So one of the things that a service that would be added would be that if you're ordered 100,000 or no, a million plantlets, you can actually see from the time that the order was put through till all the stages, and even when it's it's in the air and all the rest of that. And you can actually, I don't know how for sure. I'd have to ask Peter, but we can actually monitor the health of the plant while it's in transit, I believe. Is that right?
Well, it's called a very infancy sort of technologies, because remember that you're up in the air and your radio frequencies. I mean, basically you can't interfere. So it's a wishful thinking to go that far. If it leads us to there, I'm not sure. I would say just from the ability, just through barcodes and so forth, being able to track it, and it's important for the grower as well. So when he gets it, he knows exactly what he got and when, and he can, do his own sort of mapping of the results, how well it produced based on this batch. So there's already enough good companies out there to choose from, and there's certainly, we have some ideas how to add some, additional value to that particular aspect of the industry. So for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that might be a little bit much to actually monitor the health. I mean, we're getting into...
if we have to monitor, Dennis, I was just thinking of sending you on the plane, and then she could give me a report.
The green boots. We're going to have the signature Pharmagreen green boots. And even if I'm not
are they dead yet?
Yeah, are they dead yet? Was there any turbulence? So so that alone, the tissue culture, so I'm going to pull it back again to Alliance. So Alliance, the biggest, the revenue streams for Alliance, obviously, and for Pharmagreen as well, is the tissue culture plantlets. That's going to be where the bulk of it is, and the CBD Dana strain, because there's a lot of different ways we can go with that. And then, of course, Alliance has the Quebec facility, which we've already engaged ICOR to start construction. And the one of the things, and I think I said this on the last show, but that the reason we're going to be successful in Quebec is because Quebec is obviously pushing to get 20 to 25% of the licenses across Canada, and the team that we're working with, like ICOR and all the rest of the individuals that are involved, they've been involved in 6 of the 8 licenses that are already approved. So basically, we have a very good chance of not a very good chance. We have 99.9% chance we're going to be approved. Now, I wanted to bring up something else, and Peter, I think you and I talked about this briefly, but you were not necessarily in the meetings with these people. But something that we're talking to another group that's in Quebec, it's in a different area than our facility there, is they have a net zero energy technology, which we're working on, and it's primarily used in it's used in greenhouse environments. And so what it does is, and that's one of your biggest costs, obviously, of a grow operation. Oh, and after this, I want to ask you, Peter, the difference between growing indoors, greenhouse, and outdoors. So that's just another thing. But anyway, so this technology is something that's been developed with one of the government agencies, the NRC, and we're working on pulling that into our group, and it ties in very well because we are obviously going to have greenhouses on the complex ground, and also it's something that we can license to other people. So that's another thing. So what, Peter, is the difference when you're growing in a greenhouse versus outdoors versus the indoors, like the typical ACMPR that we have today?
Okay, well, outdoors is kind of, all in the industry, we always call it dirt weed. It really smells, call it like dirt, and you can really tell when you smell in it that it's got that specific, call it function. But basically, from a quality perspective, well, you're growing by mass, so your resources to grow it are a fraction of that of growing indoors. But you're also more susceptible to mold. The rains carry it, and there's big factors, call it, with that. And at the end of the day, you don't produce this very high, call it, crystal-rich products as you would growing indoors. Now, you can argue, well, that may be true for Canada, other parts of the world. You got better sunshine period and so forth. That's true. I mean, you would grow better quality. It still would smell like dirt weed, in my opinion. I've seen some stuff in other parts of the region, and that's the case.
What about Colombia? Colombia's been getting a lot of attention lately, and that's mostly outdoors, and that's what makes them a really low cost producer or cultivator.
So if you put it on a shelf, and let's say you put it side by side with a desirable strain, which I like to always use, call it Rockstar, but growing by a Rockstar talent indoors under, this PL lighting, super day, every day, no bugs, no diseases, no stresses to the plant like you would perhaps have outdoors. And hands down, there's no comparison on the type of quality you get from indoor grown THC bud than you really would even call it from Colombia. It just basically becomes cost. And when you're smoking the raw bud, or that's the, call it, consumption, or that's the transaction is with the raw bud, call it, there is quality of difference that matter. If you're doing it, call it, for doing formulations or extractions, well, where it comes from, it doesn't, call it, really matter. It's about how much crystal it really has at the end of the day, because it's a process. The more crystal it has, the more of the oils you get, and the quicker, call it, you can extract it. So for smoking type purposes or raw flower consumption, big differences. For doing oils out of it, really basically who cares, as long as you certify you've got no pesticides or herbicides in your production practices of growing it, and you can grow exponentially a lot more for a lot cheaper growing outdoors. Now, greenhouses, in my opinion, would be very well suited for like Canadian regions where you can do all year round growing. You're certainly reducing the risk, as I mentioned, to the outdoor growing cycles. For THC production, grown in greenhouses as well, I said, my opinion, again, if you do it for extracted type products, sure, greenhouses, they still have a, tendency to be a quality more associated with the outdoor, even though they have a nice tight bud structure and all that. Hydroponically growing greenhouses is really getting pretty close to the indoor THC growing. But I've seen it before too. You really put a plant outside outdoors and then bring it back indoors. It grows completely different, and vice versa. Take a plant grown outdoors and introduce it to indoors, and the same thing. So in my opinion, if you're doing it for retail bud production and you want to produce these quads type quality, the words that are used on the market, you want to do it with very controlled, dialed-in lighting. Technologies have gone leaps and bounds in the last 10 years, from your HPS lightings, high-pressure sodiums and metal highlights for your vegetative state, to these type of lightings produced by like PL lighting and LEDs. I've been testing LEDs, by the way, for 8 years. I think they have a place, especially for tissue culture, that's for sure. Low heat dissipation, especially if you're doing tiered growing. Is the heat emitted from LEDs is still some heat. It's not like zero, as people like to sometimes refer to. And that really affects your upper layer of plants as heat rises, and you're creating these different environments that you don't want to create. So, LED for actual flowering, I think price per light unit isn't really that beneficial, honestly, as it is using, some of the other, very advanced technologies that are available today. So basically, to sum it up, I would call it, outdoors in proper regions so your risk factors are eliminated. Because here's an example. You guys heard that in Colorado about 2 years ago. Their stock or what they got off the fields was like 10% of the total what was planted because they had a really bad week or two of rains, basically all turned into mold. So, they're southern down in terms of locations, so their per capita sun and temperatures were better, but that doesn't mean that rains don't come over there as well. So I'll look at, greenhouse definitely for CBD, all year round growing, and indoor cultivation for high-end THC products and from a cultivating schedule. I'm a big fan of hydroponics, call it non-circulating system, because if you do develop any issues with the plant, you're basically pushing it back. Any filtration, I think, is just a waste of resources, to recirculate, call it that, unless you really scrub it. And like in our case, what we plan to do, give you an example, we're using well water. We don't have city water, so we're just in process, digging the wells on the Duroche site. So we're going to do 3, 2 that will be used at the facility, 3rd for redundancy, basically filtration, UV light sterilization, and osmosis that the water will be pushed through. Then we add real-time fertigation systems in terms of the fertilizers and so forth and the feeding. Then, of course, will be flood and drain beds type of setup, multi-layered. And then what comes back, we thought about it's actually worthwhile to filter that again, because believe it or not, that water with that fertilizer content is cleaner than what's coming out of the well. So we'll be able to strip the fertilizer out of it and reuse the water. So basically, we're very environmentally friendly. Yeah, and green technologies. I'm really a fan of green technologies. Another thing that we've been introduced to, that's kind of important to notice, other LPs listening could use some thought about this, but the use of biomass. So basically, Health Canada has strict environments about your waste. Well, this technology, I'm just on the early stages of evaluating it, but basically it's like a compression of your composting in an expedited time, but the biomass initial tests the company is showing that it can produce up to 70%, call it, better product. And why? Well, basically in growing, it's the ratios between oxygen and nutrient delivery at the root level. So as long as, call it, you can increase, the ability or the availability of oxygen, you'll uptake more nutrients. And then, on the canopy, if you do complementary systems like supplementing it with CO2, while you're driving everything very fast, and therefore you're driving for much better, end result. Because you basically, once you flip it into flower, you have 8 to 12 weeks, and that's it. So if you can have that much better growing day every day in that time period, it'll definitely produce a better product as the end result. So biomass is something kind of new overall to the industry. We're very interested in looking at it for the substrate production for the tissue culture plantlets, because basically, again, it's very green. Whatever you produce in your greenhouse is the waste. You run your little plant on your facility. They're not that cost onerous at all. And then basically you can reuse that biomass in your grow rooms again. So that to me is very, very efficient use of greenhouse technologies. Right?
Yeah, I think that's huge.
So I'm very impressed. I'm looking into it, and I think it might play, quite a big role with our production practices. That's for sure.
So would you say then? Okay, I'm just trying to see which one you would prefer. So if you're talking indoor, whether it's going to be a greenhouse or not, and I'm thinking this is more applicable to a greenhouse, would you say, in your opinion, to get the best product, hydroponics versus in the soil?
I would say yes. Soil, basically some people, Dutchman, I think Organics uses that label of organics. I've played around with organics too. Issue with organics is, you've got to build beds. So basically organics get better over time. And I don't mean one growth cycle of 2 to 3 months. I mean a year or two and so forth. You can use beneficial enzymes and bacteria that help it break down and basically, keep it, the nutrients level that much more, I guess, preferable or balanced, the words you want to use. But does it mean that you'll grow better product in organics? Well, not really, because the plants don't absorb raw bat guano or break down really, or uptake seashell castings, some of the benefits or products or earthworm castings you would use in an organic.
Talk about earthworm casting afterwards. Sorry to interrupt you, but just wondering if Al or Marcel had any, not experience with, but maybe heard about or about the worm casting. I think that's something interesting to talk about as well.
Unfortunately, I've never actually gotten a crop off other than, in my kitchen. So Marcel will be the one to ask that question.
So, Marcel, any experience with worm casting?
I've used worm castings.
Really
I've done
Marcel.
pretty much, but sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now? What are you looking to get a job at that mobile phone company?
Well, yeah.
Why not? But have you got any experience with that, or do you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I've done what Peter's done. I've tested all different styles of growing, both indoor and outdoor, hydroponic, ebb and flow, deep water culture, soilless. And I've gone through the organic stage with worm castings, and it finally dawned on me, just like it did with Peter, that the plants don't uptake worm castings. They uptake the nutrients and have to break down from the worm castings. Why not feed them the nutrients?
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense to me. It's just that, so we Alliance and Peter as well, like at Pharmagreen, we get approached like often by people that are trying to, promote these types of products. And that's why I rely on Peter as our expert for whether a lot of this stuff makes sense. Because the whole thing is we want to be able to be selling to the growers. So if doing these organic, whatever you want to call it, using the worm casting as opposed to other nutrients and so forth, if that actually made a lot of sense and it was practical and it was, beneficial to the plant and so forth, that would be something else we would add. But Peter, so you don't find that the worm casting is really...
I think what you're going to miss, though, Dennis, is if you're going to try this on large scale and go organic and use soil medium with worm castings and things like that, then you better set up one really good acreage area for your composting program, because you've got a lot of soil.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. To do it on a large scale is difficult. Yeah, you're going to have a lot of worms. Where do you get all those worms?
But to look at going in a hydroponic
to me, guys, we call it reclamation of land, organics, beneficial enzymes, bacteria, where you got marginal land. And, you prepare the soil, basically it's a function, call it, of time, and these organics to break down, and you go back a year or two later, like you say, either compost pile or maybe a field, and you grow crops in it. For labeling that it's organics, to me, one thing organics as a label really carries is that people understand that you're not using pesticides or herbicides. So that, to me, is like what you use for a substrate is basically going to result how your end product is produced. But the organic label carries the importance, if you do have it, that you haven't used any pesticides and herbicides. But basically, Health Canada's program as you know, is very, very strict in the use of pesticides and herbicides. So I would prefer, I even did aeroponics, but those are get very complicated system because basically they're jets under the roots where water passes through. It's a ratio really of spraying them. And the roots will grow much faster in that systems, but basically they grow also so fast it's an issue of maintenance of jets. If you basically have, an area that is not being covered or doesn't get enough moisture on the roots, they die very quickly, and then you get root rot, and then spawns diseases like pythium, which is the wilting disease. And basically, once you get it in your system, extremely very difficult to get it cleaned out of your facility. I like KISS methodology, so keep it simple, stupid. Hydroponics, if you do it to waste, is really great because you're not recirculating any potential problems, and you're getting pretty good oxygen to nutrient delivery. So it's my most preferred system, I would say. I just don't like playing in dirt.
But what I do find is I can achieve better flavors out of a soil medium than out of a hydroponic system. So if you're going for the terpene profiles and things like that, I can achieve that better out of soil than I can out of water.
I was going to mention that in roots, perhaps you might, because the roots contain value in that as well. This should be, my opinion, harvested, especially for the terpene profiles. And I guess to me, it really is important on the overall the cultivating success of a growth schedule. Because, at the end of the day, let's say your AC system, HVAC, goes out. Basically, you fry the crop, you fry the terpenes, and call it in, and it's gone. And if you have a really good productive every day, you will produce, more terpenes as opposed to less. I think different profiling, there's a lot of research that can be said about what you just said, trying to produce, the different better terpene profiles. And just so you see, what's the value of the plant between the different components. So basically, I think CBD carries a bigger value on the market, let's say, than THC. You also have CBG, which, by the way, was the Charlotte's Web craze, and kudos to those individuals, and has been linked to CBG is the main component, kind of linking to stopping the seizures, and inadvertently they have a very high count of CBG in the Charlotte's Web. Then you got your different terpenes that serve different functions as well. So I guess if you're getting more into, kind of the DIN number product making, which by mean that pharmaceutical type products, you might want to be able to tune into your terpene profiles, because I think the pharmaceutical companies are going to be demanding those profiles more and more, and not just CBD as a whole, right?
Yeah. Right. Oh, I was going to ask you, Peter, if you don't mind, just a little refresher on, you got CBD, CBG, and then there's the third one.
Yeah,
CBN.
You said CBD, CBG, and isn't there another?
The main cannabinoids are going to be THC and the compounds of THC, such as THCA, THCV, CBD, CBG, and CBN. And CBN is the one that puts you to sleep, but that's degraded THC.
Yes.
Sorry, the CBN you're saying is degraded THC?
Right. So once THC, or once the bud goes too far, the THC starts to break down and it turns into CBN. And that's why old, I don't like to say old, but dated cannabis will make you sleepier than when it was fresher.
Well, that sounds like it's a solution for sleep.
It is. And I've purposely grown strains to get the highest amount of CBN to act as sleep aids.
Yeah, because I think that's phenomenal. I myself, if I want to sleep or something, I like to take this ortho product or some sort of melatonin or whatever. But I don't want to rely on any of the pharmaceutical stuff. Oh, that's actually going to be a good question for discussion for all of us. Is where do we think Big Pharma is going to take this? Well, okay, I guess we know where they're going to take it, but when do we think Big Pharma is going to kick in?
I'm thinking that Big Pharma has already been kicked in for quite some time, but Big Pharma has been trying to synthesize it, and they're realizing now that they can't synthesize it, so you're going to see more of them getting involved in large-scale operation of I'll call it a pharmaceutical product, but that pharma is spelled F-A-R-M.
Yeah. Well, see, this is the thing, and Peter and I talked about this, but and that's why when Peter said that the CBD Dana strain would be more like a medical grade or pharmaceutical grade CBD rather than, just a typical one that's...
And then if you look at Merck, you mentioned about synthesizing. I agree with you. I'm so called against really, doing that. You look at Myrnol, which was pulled off the shelf 2-3 years ago, which was synthetic THC. It might be, the same kind of formulation of THC, but the fit, on a molecular level, isn't. It's done, in a lab. It's not like the natural receptors we have in our body. Why did they was pulled off the shelves? As far as I understand, 2 to 3 people died of kidney failure because of the synthesized THC. It's meant something to be said about something that we naturally produce as human beings and being able to absorb it that way. From the studies I've been reading, we produce CBD, and women who, after pregnancy in their lactating stage, produce the most amount of CBD. And I think it's, such great medical benefits, on its own. And I think it's our responsibility as individuals in this industry to certainly protect its nutraceutical value and not just let the pharmaceutical side of it steer the content and patent and restricted from, ability of every Canadian or every human being on the planet to say, hey, pass me some, some CBD Dana to sprinkle on my salad or oil or whatever the case. I totally agree with that. I think, there's a lot more value in the plant as a whole than opposed to getting into the synthesization. And, costs are tremendous, as get into the clinical trials 1, 2, and 3, and it really is left up to the very few companies on a global scale to compete it. So I really hope the industry grows, from a nutraceutical perspective more so than from a pharmaceutical perspective, right?
Yeah. So I'd have to agree with that, and it's because so like Marcel was saying, they tried to Big Pharma is trying to synthesize it because they don't want to get their hands dirty, I guess, and also maybe
it's not even a matter of that. What they realized a long time ago is they can't patent this unless they figure out how to patent it. But by synthesizing it, they can patent that synthesized.
Yeah, good point.
Then they hold the rights for the next 20 years on that drug. And that's the whole purpose of doing what they did. They just didn't think as far outside the box as somebody like me.
Well, no, because and here's what's interesting. So tell me if anybody else has heard this. So a couple of people, and I won't mention their names or anything, had mentioned that some big pharma is taking all these different strains and they're locking them up, or they've tried to pass some. How they do all their what do you call that on K Street? What do? You're lobbying. And they were trying to kind of get a lock on almost cannabis in general, which is obviously you can't. But they were trying to like you said, register or patent these particular strains. But like what Peter and I have been talking about a lot, and what
that was actually Colorado a few years ago.
Anymore. It's not even about strains anymore.
Colorado did that a few years ago, where they started allowing people to copyright strains.
Yeah,
and the applications just flew in like you wouldn't believe, and they had to put a stop to it because they realized that every Tom, Dick, and Harry was turning around and copyrighting everybody else's strains.
Yeah, and the thing is you can't even really, the strains aren't even significant anymore as they used to be, or people used to think they are, and Peter knows more about this than I do, but it's not really about the strain anymore. It's more about what you're going to do with the product afterwards. And because the strain can vary, you could have 100,000 different types of kush, right, Peter? Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah.
Well, hybrids, they always make them. I mean, the benefit of it is, I guess, if you're ingesting the raw flower, you know, a rock star smells like a great rock star, and it's different than a death bubba. So it's for consumption of the raw flower because you appreciate it, you smell it. And, you know, from the other reason, call it from a production point of view, you would say, well, different strains. It maybe you might say, well, this one has a lot better, different terpene profile than that. But at the end of the day, I think with the amount of producers and the capabilities that extractions have reached leaps and bounds in the last, call it 3-4 years, where you're having distillation, you'll be able to buy these particular cannabinoids on a separate basis and then recombine them in your formulation or whatever you're making. So I think really the strains might shift more from the consumption of the raw product and more into the type of formulations of the edibles.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's what it's going to come down to. Well, actually, speaking of that, so there's two different things that come to mind. One is actually what the Alliance is doing with some formulations with we have a compounding pharmacist on the board of directors. Actually, no, I'll leave that for now. But what I wanted to ask is just for Peter or Martel or both, if you want to kind of educate the listening audience on things like absorption and efficacy, which I believe are the same thing. And so what is the best way to actually get the product into the system to get the most bang for your buck, if you will?
Rectally.
Really?
Yes.
That could be a whole show right there. I'm just kidding.
No, in all honesty, if doctors actually had their way with medication, all of it would be by suppository, because your liver is the biggest massive filter that you can imagine, and it filters every bit of blood that goes into your system. Yeah. When you smoke or ingest cannabis, the uptake is into the lipids that are into the bloodstream, then carried to the liver. The THC is converted to hydroxy 11-THC, and that's what gets you high. When you're using it rectally in a suppository, it attaches to the blood that just left the liver. So it's carrying all of the cannabinoids to all of the organs, to all of the CB1 and CB2 receptors. By the time it gets back to the liver, there's not enough THC to convert. Your absorption rate rectally is somewhere between 90 to 95%. Ingesting is somewhere in the vicinity of 50%. Orally, and there's arguments about orally, the amount of absorption. I just include that at about 50%. And smoking is closer to about 3 to 5% because you're actually burning off more than you're consuming. It's just smoking faster, so it hits you quicker.
Okay, so you're saying that if you do it with the suppository, it's like 95%?
95% will be absorbed into the bloodstream and utilized by the body.
Okay, and then you get into ingesting is 50, orally is 50, but then smoking is 3 to 5?
Right.
Something like that. Now, there's a company that's out there that's doing something that's all about absorption. I can't remember the name at the moment, but actually, no, let's leave that for now. So, Peter, what are your thoughts?
Well, I really concur with that. What you nailed it. I totally agree with you. You know, I've been helping people, you know, where I believe, for example, if you're fighting cancer, it's about THC. THC kills tumor cells. You know, I kills them, call it on contact, where CBD is more for your immune system. In conjunction, you're getting benefits of both. For example, you know, some of the research and people are taking THC capsules. And basically, that's what I've been trying to dial in is, you know, efficacy dosages. I mean, when you give somebody too much THC, it becomes more of like an opiate because they can't function. They're too high, sitting, you know, and staring at space. But I did find if you're specifically with cancer, if you can take more THC, the better, call it, the results have been. What are the other positive effects? when you're taking, let's say, the THC capsules. Well, first of all, when you take it, it takes about an hour or two, depending if you have a full stomach or not, to go through your digestive system, like was explained, and for it to work. But there's also positive side effects, because THC will put you in a very deep sleep, so past REM sleep. And if you can sleep, you're already beginning your healing process. So you wake up in the morning after very sound 8 hours sleep, no tossing and turning, then you wake up already in a better mood. So you're not an antidepressant at the same time, and then it also stimulates hunger. So you go have a good meal, and you give your energy, body to fight or fight the disease or be in a better state. And then it's also THC eliminates pain, psychotropic pain, where CBD, in my opinion, is really very, very powerful anti-inflammatory way of treating inflammation. And this is why we've been doing the I call them informal studies with our CBD dana and treating inflammation as a cause of pain and therefore its treatment of it. But to sum it up, really, my opinion is THC is very other, great positive. I've also been able, using THC, to help people with opiates addiction. It really does reduces that dependency on it. Is again where I'd call it more pharmaceuticals, call it, to step in or work with them in joint venture and doing formulations. We're looking at Pharmagreen brands as well. But basically is to increase the efficacy, call it, to dosage sort of ratios. And this is where technologies of better absorption, water solubility, and all these technologies are coming to the forefront. That's great. But, I'm not going to tell you it's a cure for cancer, in my opinion, because I can't say that. I don't have enough research. I think it does tremendous positive benefits for treatment of that disease. And I think it should be taken a lot more seriously and, be taken a look at as a viable solution for cancer, in my opinion.
I don't claim that cannabis cures anything, but I have a really good way of explaining how it works. And it's simple. Your body has an endocannabinoid system. If you have a deficiency of that endocannabinoid system, then you're going to get sick. You supplement it with more cannabis. The endocannabinoid system is what fuels the immune system. The immune system goes in and heals the body. If people that have a really healthy immune system are the ones that can have one puff off a joint and be wrecked because they don't need the cannabinoids. The sicker you are, the more cannabinoids you're going to use and feel less effect.
I guess also dependency, right? You got to throw that in there a bit. That you're building up tolerance. Your body's able. You can take and not smoke all the time. I agree with you. 6 months and you do one, and then the effects are a lot higher than if you smoke that next joint. Continuously smoking every day. So
no. Here's what happened to me in my case is at one time I used to consume 5 grams of oil per day, or the equivalent of 50 grams of cannabis per day. Ingest it, and I would never get high. As my symptoms started to disappear, and the neurological damage that was done from basically being in wheelchairs and bedridden before, I had to start cutting back my dose because I started actually getting high. My body wasn't using as much, which meant there was a lot more to convert to make me high. What we've done is as part of our patent and our clinical trials, is all been at low dose. So we've basically been doing our trials with patients using low dose cannabis, which is low dose in THC and CBD, and we come back with astounding results.
I've also correlated. I correlated results of cannabis, use to body fat ratio. Those who have a higher body fat ratio are able to store it more, and the effects are a lot more profound with individuals, I found with lower body fat ratio. So, because, it's kind of like what your body is processing, your body fat is able to, it's able to store in your body fat, whereas opposed to an individual who doesn't have that ability, it gets processed, a lot more, and therefore we're finding more profound effects. But I call it, cannabis use, especially if you want to, look at it from a perspective of treatment of ailments to help those ailments. It's like a sleep number. I especially encapsulated form. It's an 8-hour or so relief period that it works. I agree with your what you said earlier. What is the best? I mean, what you explained, the rectal, it really is for those reasons. But on a general, call it consumption, where most individuals prefer orally as opposed to the other way, it really is important, I think, to doing the combination of THC and CBD, so you eliminate some of the psychotropic effects of THC by combining with CBD. And basically, you're getting, and if you can do it in more ratios from a, healing point of view, I'm finding that it's a much better benefit to do more as opposed to less. But kind of the research.
Yeah, it's a matter of, because I agree with what you were saying about body fat ratio, but I changed the game a bit slightly, so that's not even a concern anymore. We don't worry about body fat ratio anymore.
I see. Well, very interesting research.
That's not something that I can.
So why would that be?
I can't discuss that on there. We'll discuss that because it's part of our patent.
Oh yeah, we won't talk about that.
Right.
Okay, so
at this point, it's still kind of proprietary, but I can, once we're off air, we'll have a chat, and then I can explain this a little further. So Peter has an understanding.
Yeah, we'll do that maybe off the. Yeah. Now, but I want to ask everybody, because I've tried, and we have, so on Alliance's advisory board, we have a couple of people. One of the fellows, he's UBC alumni. He's taken a lot of IP. He's commercialized a lot of IP from the university, and he's also our, let's say, government relations advisor. And one of the things that he keeps pointing out is that there really isn't a lot of official, formal research that's been filed or printed or published or whatever. And even when I do try to go look for some of that stuff, it's just isn't there. So what are your thoughts on published or available or formal research in Canada and the U.S. on the positive effects of cannabis?
There's very little there's very little in Canada. The one study that comes to mind in Canada was Mark Swear's study out of McGill, and that was on smoked cannabis for pain. And he figured out pretty quickly with his study that the more you smoke, the better it works. And that's what his study proved. But for some reason, nobody in Canada, including the government, want to recognize that study was there, because Health Canada says there are no studies. Israel has thousands of studies because they never stopped researching cannabis. They weren't bound by it. That's why Mechoulam got to research as freely as he did. So there's tens of thousands of published articles on cannabis that have been done. It's just whether or not they'll be recognized because they weren't done in Canada or the United States.
Are they even going to accept? Are they going to accept anything that up to this point? Because it's not. I mean, it's not even legal up till this point, right? Technically.
Yeah, but for some reason they have it in their head that, well, it doesn't exist because it didn't happen here.
Or
is their attitude that they've taken, but it's more of a scapegoat attitude because. Well, technically, in the U.S., there's very little studies done on cannabis because they're not allowed legally to do it. Canada was the same way. To apply to study for cannabis was basically going to cost you a fortune. Mark, kudos to him. He got Bayer to help him with fund his study, and they did their study. Awesome. But Health Canada still turned around and says there are no studies that prove that cannabis works. We know there's studies. So it's basically
that's what I'm kind of getting at, which is it's kind of amazing.
Propaganda.
Yeah, it's just because there's so much evidence or proof out there, but I guess because it's not documented the way they want it to be.
Put pictures down.
Well, pretty much. I mean, cannabis has been used medically, and we know this for the last 5,000 years.
Yeah, I was going to say 3,000.
Death. Well, no, it's 5,000 years ago that the first writings of cannabis as a medicine in China.
You know what? That's funny. I was just about to bring that up. China is the one place where they'll cut your head off if you're dealing with cannabis, but yet they've been messing around with that stuff for 5,000 years.
And they grow really good cannabis in China. They just keep those strains to themselves.
Yeah, that I don't know anything about, but that's interesting.
Yeah. But, I mean, all of the countries that grow cannabis, there's going to be factions that are going to keep those strains proprietary to them and nobody else.
But sorry.
Other than with legalization now, the dollar can always sway somebody.
Yes, of course. And I'm not even going to make the comment I was about to make about China. But so back to this thing about strains. So Peter and I kind of agree that it's not really so much about strains anymore. It's about kind of what you do with them. So I don't know. How do you feel about that, Marcel?
That's my whole business is that.
No, because like you just said,
but the plant has more. The benefits from the plant are endless. But I'm a medical patient. I use cannabis to recover from, instead of dying from multiple sclerosis. It works extremely well for me. Most times people would never even tell that I had MS.
Okay, so sorry to cut you off here, but not now, but maybe later. I would like to discuss that with you more because I have somebody that I would like to help that has MS. And I'd like to know what works for you.
Yep. With the MS, it's the same thing. It's just a matter of adding the right combination, and that's what I learned to do, was figure out what combinations work best and how to formulate those combinations. So for me, there's way more value into the formulations that you can do for medical. This is why I do very little on the recreational side, because recreational side, it's a matter, I can make you a kick-ass edible, or I can grow you an amazing recreational strain, but that's not what my passion is going to be. My passion is coming up with medical products to help patients.
You know, on the recreational side, you're talking about, I'm kind of not a proponent of, call it, all these distillates. Kind of seen it firsthand. My opinion, THC wasn't supposed to be consumed at 92 or 98% purity levels. I think overall it screws with a person's libido system in general at those levels. Kind of like alcohol. You can have, 99% pure, like call it ethanol, but not really, that's not for any positive consumption whatsoever. So I agree, call it with some upper limits, but not placing those limits any lower than the plant produces naturally. And here's what I really disagree with Health Canada, what they have done. So as you know, under the old system, the LPs were restricted to, call it, derivatives, not the raw flower, but 3% CBD, 3% THC. Well, 3% THC doesn't do anything from a medical, recreational. So they basically, really driving, what they call it, the gray market, because that's where you can buy the real products. So under the new system, they're pushing 10% CBD and 10% THC. Again, I think, I'm not sure who is guiding them in setting these limits, but they're basically not doing anybody favor from a medical use or recreational use, and that's one reason the gray market will prevail. Can you imagine smoking 10% weed? That's basically outdoor stuff, resembling more like industrial hemp. To get any pleasure out of it, somebody would be smoking bags and bags, and they'll just give up. They'll cough their lungs out, head enough, and move on, perhaps to a can of beer to quench that thirst from all that smoke.
The Florida dirt weed we used to get in the 70s, basically. It was about 10% THC.
Yeah, so I think they need to really sharpen their pencil on that and get some, I think, real good advice from individuals like you who are formulators, understand, efficacy, call it ratios, and a lot more like ourselves, we understand dosages. But certainly, these limits, gray market will never go away, even if they bring in the edibles, call it at that level. But there's something to be said about not letting, let it go wild either. I think there should be some upper limits, but certainly not at that level, right?
Washington, Colorado, Oregon all set 10 milligrams maximum dose for edibles.
Yeah, but when we say 10 milligrams of what concentration, though?
10 milligrams THC total.
Oh, I see THC total, okay.
Right. And what they found is a first-time user eating a whole 10 milligram dose were the ones that were ending up in the hospital and stuff and freaking out, because 10 milligrams is a lot for a first-time user. 3 milligrams. Because Peter, you do the same thing that many of us do, and we forget because we use so much cannabis ourselves on a daily basis, all right, that we forget that the new users out there aren't used to taking what we take. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you mean for somebody who consumes a lot, right? Yeah.
Right. We have a tolerance built up. I mean, I've got a tolerance from the last 10 years of consuming cannabis oil on a daily basis that I never get high. But if I gave a new user the dose that I take every day, they would be asleep for 3 friggin' days. So when we're looking at dosages, especially in the recreational market, they've got to be very careful how they do this, or somebody's going to have a brownie on a Sunday night and miss 2 days of work because they slept.
Yeah,
so I can understand why they have the limits for edibles. For the smoking, there shouldn't be a limit. I mean, because the effects are only going to last for 90 minutes, 2 hours anyways.
Yeah, and then, you look on the medical value and the benefits that way. My opinion, I'm working, call it, with individuals taking dosages orally in a capsule form, anywhere, call it, between, honestly, 50 to 200 milligrams. But again, it's what's within the capsule is very important, not to, and that will determine kind of also the milligrams used.
But again, it's because it's a medical patient. The recreational laws don't apply to the medical patients, other than the fact that if they force the LPs to grow these low-grade THC strains, then there's going to have medical LPs that are going to be able to supply the strains that medical patients need.
Yes, or do formulations that, call it, are higher. There's recreational doesn't need the dosages of medical, and medical needs to be effective, right?
Exactly. That's where it boils down.
Yeah, I kind of accidentally got disconnected there, but then Peter hooked me back up, so we're good.
There you go.
Okay.
You hear me okay?
Yep.
Peter's always hooking me up in case I need... Never mind, I was going to say something, but I'm not.
Yep.
Yeah, not true, Dennis. Never was.
I know what you're talking about. So, so that I think it's very interesting that there's all this time has passed, like literally thousands of years, and Health Canada and obviously in the U.S. as well, they don't accept any of these kind of studies or research or anything. I just find that amazing because it's like you can tell that it works. I mean, there's nothing better than, first-hand testimonials and so forth. But I guess, if they want to make it official, there's certain laws and rules and so forth. But yeah, it's kind of really amazing to me that a lot of people are still not satisfied that it actually does what it does for people.
No,
and that's the thing.
That I was going to mention that we, as an industrialized nation, took the, leap ahead, even though it's a bit of a paradox, because even the liberals signed on to the Drug United Nations policy, so we're breaking that. But we made the positive jump, being the second country, but the first call it, I guess, industrialized, to really legalize it. I understand Mexico was visiting Canada to look at our legalization system. We finally pushed the buttons in the right direction, let the genie out of the bottle, and I think, overall, as we're talking about the industry, I think it's heading in a very positive direction as opposed to where it was, even before legalization. So, kudos to Canada for doing it. So
it's a step forward. It definitely is. It may not be the right step. There's a lot of hiccups in the way.
Baby steps.
It's a step forward. Yeah, it is. I mean, there's medically. I mean, the patients are getting thrown under the bus with this. That's my biggest problem. We're already seeing shortages
so how do you think
now
that?
from the LPs.
Because it's a cost, or what?
The cost.
Why do you think patients are being thrown under the bus? Oh, because supply is being cut off, or not cut off, but it's being restricted, or
a lot of patients aren't getting their medicines, but recreational people are. Because of
but they're not getting their medication.
Well, there's a reason for that, though, guys. Because they've taken our dispensaries from us. We're not allowed to walk into a store where we know somebody there that knows our ailments, that can tell us this is what we've got good on the menu this week. Here, want to have a smell, have a look, blah 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 blah, right? We don't have that anymore. They have stripped us of that. And although, thank God, there are still some men and women out there with really big balls that are still open and
I know
taking care of their
some
patients.
that actually they go around, they actually deliver. Like they'll bring the suitcase and they're dressed professionally and they look good. And I think that's the way it should be, because I agree with you. So this is what was going to be one of my next questions is dispensaries versus online. So to me, it seems to me that, especially if you have a medical condition, you don't want to always have to go out to a dispensary. But like what you just said, sometimes you do want to, because you want to look at it, see it, smell it, feel it, whatever. But
and as Paula said, one of the owners here at Gunjanistas, sometimes, like for myself, the only time I get out is when I come to the lounge or go to the dispensary. I'm either home or I'm here.
Now, there's good arguments. Yeah, good arguments for both. Some people are like, you know what? I know what's kind of like, now, like my son's wife has a serious medical condition, and she needs certain treatments for her pain, and she doesn't like the opioids and the morphine and all that. But she doesn't. Her mobility is a bit limited, so she doesn't want to go out. So that's an interesting thing you just said, because sometimes so there is an argument for the retail location for medical.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about Shoppers Drug Mart has jumped in. There's some other pharmacies that are about to jump in now, but they're going after the rec market. They're not going after the medical market. Come on.
But no. What makes you say that? Because I feel like a Shoppers would obviously, I think, and I didn't research it at all really.
You think that Loblaws is going to have a medical marijuana section?
Well, no, Loblaws, I don't, but then Loblaws does own Shoppers, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What they're going to do, what you're going to find in a Loblaws or even in a Shoppers, you're going to find, like they have the wine kiosks in the larger Shoppers and in the larger grocery stores. You can go in and get alcohol now. And they have these wine kiosks where you can go in and somebody is standing there who knows the products that are on the shelves right there. Do you think that that's going to happen? They're going to have another little kiosk for cannabis, and there's going to be somebody there that has been registered, that they know, like a teacher, whatever, they know what they're talking about. That's what they need for medical, Period. I don't care. As a recreational person, should I be able to just walk into a store and purchase my meds?
Yeah.
Or my cannabis? Yes, it's fucking legal.
Yeah, and it's like it doesn't matter. It's like,
and you can't. Well, you can't. You can't in Ontario, but you can
Not
here.
Not
as a recreational patient, you can walk into a store and buy it.
Well,
but
Ontario
the
is
Nova
a good
Scotia
example,
Liquor
Marcel.
Commission has already stated that they won't be selling medical cannabis products. Pardon?
I was just going to say Ontario is a good example now. We have no choice if we want legal cannabis. Either you've got to be medical and already in the system, or you have to go through an LP. There's no storefronts that we can legally go to. There's nowhere.
There are some storefronts that are still out there, aren't
in Ontario. There are some illegal dispensaries open still, yes, for patients, taking care of their patients like somebody should.
Right.
You know?
Yes, exactly.
There's, from what I understand, there are still about 40 or 50 dispensaries open, either 19 plus or medical in Hamilton. In Toronto, they're all but drying up. They went after another bunch.
Well, because they're under a lot of pressure. But what about the mobile operations? I mean, I would think those would be the best ones for them to operate in that gray area or illegal area. Is there a lot of that in Toronto?
Yeah, there is. Are you going to have a delivery service? Is that what you're getting at?
No. I don't even want to have that discussion on the radio. But, yeah, it's like no. I'm yeah. So okay. So I'm just wondering. Like, I would assume that would be the best way, because then you get the best of both worlds. One is, it's like, hey, I know what I want, so I just phone them up and they bring it. Like even my son and his wife, he'll order from Aurora, even though Aurora didn't have the best product for a while, but now it's getting better. And because he orders it and it shows up. And same
here's the thing.
Hey, I want to go to the dispensary. But now I think the delivery method of the mobile is you get both. It's like, hey, I know what I want, so I'm going to call you up and come over, but I may switch it up a little bit. I may want a couple edibles.
Yeah, that doesn't work for me. I've been doing that for 40 years already with the guy down the road. What I need now is I'm at the point where I know what strains work for me and I know what don't. And if they don't have the strains that I like, at least I can have a conversation with somebody who knows what other people have been saying about this strain, that strain.
Right,
how this
but
oil works and things like that. You can't. Hold on one sec. You can't even legally. You cannot even have a conversation with somebody like that at OCS. Okay, you can't. They aren't even allowed to tell you. Oh yeah, another patient tried something yesterday and it was great. Like I get even from the guy that I've been dealing with for down the road. Right?
That's a very interesting dynamic. Very interesting. And I wonder what it would take to explore that.
Having an open relationship between the government and your dealer would be a nice way to start.
Your dealer. We're calling it that? Like, really?
Well, but no,
but I know what you mean. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Your cannabis sales representative.
Don't get along. That's really cool. But it's like, no, but that's a very good, I never thought about that dynamic, because I started to think about things in isolation, like, okay, I've got some mobility issues, damn it, I'm not going to this frickin' store, just send me my shit through the mail.
Yeah, but you see, I like the idea.
Very, very good point.
I like the idea of being able to walk in, but I like the idea of being able to have a conversation, and even once they open these OCS stores, you're still not allowed. Here's our strains available, red, green, blue, blah, blah, blah.
Right. And they have the right to be lazy and not tell you shit because they legally cannot.
Okay,
sorry, I take that back.
Even in the rec market, that blows because I know. And here's another valid argument. I know nothing about wine, but I do know that if I go into the vintage store downtown Toronto and walk in and say, this is what I'm having for dinner, what kind of wine should I have with it? There's going to be somebody there that says, okay, well, I've tried this, I've tried that. We hear good things about this because they're allowed to advertise what their wine tastes like. They're allowed to advertise what grapes they use, what area it was grown in, what it looks like.
So have you? Did you do a blog thing, or was it you that was doing a blog on that sort of thing, or?
No, I've been doing this show for 11 years. That's all.
No, but I'm just saying, have there been people that are kind of do blogs or try to create awareness for that situation and try to figure out how do you get the two ends to meet?
Well, the problem right now is we are comparing, and I would say we, I mean everybody is comparing the recreational market to the medical market. Okay.
Yeah, and it's two different things in the same day.
Two different things, and some people even say two different kinds of weed, but I don't believe that part.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't even know how to compare it per se. I mean, to try to, you don't mean compare as in mirror it. You mean compare as in the vast differences, or what do you mean when you say compare?
Compare, I mean, there's strains for this and there's strains for that, and if it works for you, great, and if it doesn't, try something different. You don't hear that in the recreational market. You hear, I got really fucking baked on this strain, man. Not, oh man, my feet. Like for me, when I'm talking to somebody cannabis here in the lounge, I'm like, well, you know what? My feet just went all tingly, and I love it because I can't feel my fucking pain. Okay.
Right.
And I feel relaxed, and my back doesn't hurt, and my shoulder doesn't hurt, and let's go dancing. I can't do that without it. But
there's another argument to this about cannabis.
You're really low again, Marcel. Can you move your mic?
Sorry. How's this? Better?
Yeah, well, a little bit. You might have.
Is that Al? Hey, Al, how you feeling? You getting over your flu or what?
Yeah, I'm all right. I spent the week in bed.
We had Cheryl Rose on.
What's that?
Do you remember that show, Al?
What?
The show that we had Cheryl Rose on, and she was talking about Haley, and what she'd found with Haley was the medicine that worked best for her. She picked out herself based on smell.
Oh, that's interesting.
So she would.
Wow, you know what? This just means that this whole thing is, and I kind of like it in one sense that it's still like wide open, and that just gives all sorts of opportunities for all sorts of little cottage industries to help with this sort of thing. Because, like you said, people like with the government, they can't really tell you what's good, what's not. So I don't know. What do you think it's going to? But do you think it's going to go to more of a clinic pharmacy model where you go to the clinic, these doctors are trained with.
If they don't allow people to see the product or to smell the product, then the people are going to go back to the dealers and stick with the dealers. They'll get
but what if they did the clinic model? Okay, but what do you think if the clinic pharmacy model was where they can go in, they talk to the doctor about their ailments, and then they're actually able to go next door to the pharmacy side and be able to touch, feel, smell the different products?
Yeah, now they're working on strains that have no smell now, so they're going to take that away. They don't realize that terpenes have a big play in this.
Yeah, but that surprises me because if they know anything about the industry, and I don't know as much as Peter does, that how could they not know that? How could they not realize that?
Well, in some cases, I'm sure they know
but
it.
They may realize that.
It's not to their benefit.
But it may be.
Men they're hearing about, smell is bad, how everybody doesn't like it. But I agree with the comment. It's not about, liking it alone. It's about the, what's in it. Terpenes is a big part of the product. Right.
The biggest problem we have is they're trying to over-control it.
I guess it's kind of exciting and annoying at the same time. there is still so far to go in this space.
I think is the next best business too, right?
Well, to try to take care of people who actually need the product versus, like you said, the ones that for recreational, it's like they can just go get high, whatever. But still, they obviously are a customer and they should be catered to. And, like you said, with the wine, there should be somebody that can explain. But for the medical, it's like it's obviously like more significant that there should be educated people in the space. And I don't really see a lot of pharmacists that are educated in this yet.
No, not yet. There's the people that are educated are the patients that have been doing this for years and the patients that are helping other patients. If the pharmacists don't go to them for the information, then they're not going to know.
No, that's true. And then the thing is therein could lie a whole business model of patients helping patients. But then, of course, you get the Health Canada's in there and everybody else that they're like, well, it's not official and da-da-da and this and that. So, yeah, this is going to be very interesting how this plays out. And I think recreational has, and let me ask you guys. Okay, go ahead.
For 20 years already, the patients, we're helping patients. We're still doing it, and I don't think we're going to stop. I know I'm not going to stop.
No, that won't stop. I'm not
definitely not going to stop. No, that's, in fact, I think that whole advocacy thing of patients helping patients is going to continue. Now, what the government should be doing is if they want to really help the situation, they should be allowing people to be certified to actually be a qualified person that can help somebody else, because actually that would save the whole healthcare system a shitload of money. And, and they could even say, okay, well, if you're willing to take this certification course, it's covered by the government because it's going to reduce healthcare costs across the country. That's just a high level thought.
And it's perfectly on point. But it kind of comes back to who controls the money or who has the money, because whoever has the money controls the rules or can make the rules as they go along.
And you know what?
Yeah, and when you start dealing with healthcare, then you're playing with some big boys.
Cut in here, guys, for a sec, and I just want to kind of just let you know we got like 5 more minutes left, so I want to try and kind of start dialing it down. Final thoughts on anything? You want to go first, Peter? Ooh. Peter, we can't even hear you now.
You're gargling.
I'm going to hang up on you, Peter, and I'm going to call you right back, okay? Which one's Peter, the 604 or 902?
604. Can you hear me?
I'm the 902.
We're going to call you right back, Peter, okay?
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
And while we're calling him back, any final thoughts, Dennis?
Dennis? Did we cut Dennis off?
Hi there.
Hi there.
Is this much better?
No, it's not.
Yeah, I'm still garbled. You can't hear me very well.
Well, that's better.
You just got better.
Got to call Dennis back, too.
Okay. What'd you do, hang up on everybody?
No, I think there was a snafu there.
Oh, no, I had Dennis through me, so.
Oh, okay. Well, this should be better.
Yeah, because I was connected to Peter there for a bit. So.
Okay. All right. So, anyways.
You kind of done such a good time speaking, you were wearing out my speakerphone. Maybe that's what it was.
So, final thoughts, Peter.
Well, final thoughts is I certainly appreciate to be on the show. Everything, anytime you need, another guest, that's great. Is Pharmagreen and Alliance, our strategic relationship is really getting to the next stages. So certainly follow us, see our developments. I think it's a great industry to be in, and I'm very happy to hear there's caused so much positive passion in terms of, where we want to head with this product as the industry grows. And kudos to everyone. So thank you again for the opportunity to voice my opinions. And with a little bit that I know, hopefully it was productive.
Well, we appreciate being
excellent.
here. It was a little bit above my head, but I know that Marcel likes to geek out like this. So.
I was in.
He likes the nerd out. Are we going to use the nerd word? Does anybody use that anymore?
No,
the
geek
nerd
out.
word?
We use geeking.
Oh, geek out. Okay, I got it.
Yeah. Do you know?
Okay.
There's an old joke.
Geeking
Do you
out.
know the difference between a nerd and a geek?
I'm going to say no.
A geek
get laid.
There we go. I'm going to remember that.
A nerd thinks he knows what's going on, and a geek does.
Well, there we go. Okay, I'm going to use that. Thank you for that.
There you go.
Yeah, and geeks get laid.
And Dennis, did you give your final thoughts?
Well, here's the thing. My final thoughts, what I wanted to do is, again, I wanted to promote the company, but I'm going to leave that. And what I really would like to say in my final note is what was touched on by Marcel as far as people who have been taking the product, using the product for medical purposes for many years. If there's a way, some sort of mechanism or an organizational structure where people can help other people, because that's going to be the best. That's even better than doctors to some extent, as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, it's not
we're
as...
the ones on the ground talking to people. I mean...
That's what I mean. So I was going to promote the company, but I'd like to promote that
I've got
concept.
ADHD,
Yeah.
so when somebody says to me, man, I heard you got ADHD and you're using cannabis. What are you doing? I can actually say this is what I've been doing for this many years. And if somebody comes to me and says, my dog's not doing so good. I heard your dog was doing good after you put him on cannabis. I can say, well, yeah, this is what I did. I mean, I'm not talking as an expert. I'm talking as a patient that's
a person on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're on the ground. It's a war, not a war, but you know what I mean. And somebody's on the ground. They can tell you a lot more than some guy who's sitting in the war room speculating what's happening.
Doctors are
and
practitioners.
So I would love to see that get expanded.
They're taught, right?
Yeah, I would love to see that get expanded, because I really believe in that. I'm a big believer in that, because I'm not trying to take anything away from doctors or any other experts and so forth, but sometimes they just meet a patient for a little while and they're not using it themselves and all that stuff. I really do think that there should be some kind of a movement towards cannabis users for medical purpose helping others. I think that would be a big thing. I'd love to be part of that.
Oh, if I have
those are my final thoughts. And by the way, buy ACG and hold. That's the other thing. Buy and hold.
Okay.
Just buy the stock and hold it.
Hold it. Like so many.
Buy and hold
onto it.
That's like my last shameless promote there.
If I was going to have a final thought, it would have to be patients need their own place to go where they can talk to people. And if the rec market doesn't want to have people that you can go in, I mean, it sounds like good salesmanship to know your product. When you go into the Fido store, you know that this person knows what an Apple is, and it knows what a Samsung is, and it knows what a RCA is, and because they sell these products. When you go into a cannabis store, now, an illegal cannabis store, those people behind the counter, they know what they're talking about. They deal with these products every day on a going basis, several times with different patients a day. Okay? All you're going to get from the OCS store in Ontario is, what would you like, please? The gold? Okay,
yeah,
that's $4.75 for a quarter pound, or whatever the fucking price is.
You're just getting a clerk, basically. Marcel, so I'm not...
Too bad it's not...
I don't want to...
Sorry, too bad it's not aisle 5 special on Purple Kush.
Well, Walmart's thinking about it. So Walmart is thinking about
Marcel, yeah, sorry, go ahead. So Marcel, just before we go, if you and I can have a quick chat, even right after this call, that would be good, about
once we're off the air.
Yeah, once we're off the air.
Yeah,
I'll give you my phone number.
There you go.
Yeah, because what I'm interested in, I'd like to know any sort of protocols that you have found that were successful for people with MS. And obviously, if you've experienced it yourself directly, again, you're the physician now. You're the best man for the job.
Usually. That's what I was
but I mean, that at
trying
least
to
is a good
convince
start
doctors years ago. Because I have MS, I've read the neurology books on MS, so I know what the neurologist learned. And my problem with the neurologists were books were written almost 100 years ago by doctors that were being described their symptoms from patients.
Yeah, they didn't have
nothing hands-on.
Exactly.
And they've never updated those books.
Exactly.
And patients can articulate themselves much better now.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is why
that is my biggest thing out of this call. And thank you, Al. Thank you very much for having us on.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you.
And what I'm taking away from this is something that I think is huge, and it's the whole advocacy thing with patients helping patients kind of thing. And I think there should be something, we should do something more about that.
Well, if you're ever in Hamilton, Ontario, pop by the lounge and we'll show you firsthand what patients are like helping patients.
Okay, I'd love to do that. Let's do that. Peter, let's do that.
Coming up for sure.
We'll discuss it further as well, because that's all we do is patients helping patients.
Yep.
Yeah, well, after this call, Marcel, if we can do just a little 5-minute call, I appreciate that, because somebody important to me has a family member that suffers from MS, and there is he has no real, like, formal protocol. And I'd love to just, even if, I'm not expecting you to be the expert and do, but it'd be a start, something to do.
How about let's wrap things up, and then we can hang up, and you guys can have that call.
That sounds good.
Awesome.
Sounds like a plan. It's been an awesome.
Thanks again, Al. So, Marcel, you have to call me because you have my number, but I don't have yours.
I don't have yours, but he'll turn the radio off
I'll
and
shut
turn
everything
the speakers
off,
off.
and then you guys can just talk, and I'll leave.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'll give you my phone number.
This has been the 420 Radio Show. We're live here at Gunjanistas, Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to come in and have a listen, it's only $5 to come on and hang out. Sometimes we got comedy going on, and anything else coming up, Paula? Another Puff and Paint?
Puff and Paint?
Another Puff and Paint at the end of November. I think we got comedy next week on Friday. So we got some stuff going on. Come on in and hang out in a very open environment. I think we're going to do some karaoke or something. Yeah.
I like that. And you know what? I really like your show. I hope to be on again.
Well, definitely. I appreciate you coming on, and I don't know who. I think next week we have Glenn from Conimatch coming on, and I'm going to sign up on the air because I need a date. Paula's
You're going to do a live signing?
Yeah, Paula's going to help me do my bio.
It's a live signing.
Yeah.
Live signing on Conimatch.
Conimatch.
Yeah. Well, Conimatch is where you it's like a dating site for people who smoke marijuana.
Yes, sir.
Sure is.
The owner.
Okay, I just made that up. I didn't know it was
be
true.
Coming and he's going to come and hang out with us, and we're going to talk about what he's doing there at Conimatch and blah blah blah. And I think Mary Jane will be back with us. She's at Weedstock. Weedstock.
You know what I think would be fun? Peter, are you still there?
Yeah.
Peter, I think what we should do is we should go to Hamilton. We should be there in the background when you guys do a show, and because what I'm equating it to some extent, is back in the Johnny Carson day, when Johnny Carson, he would have guests, and the guests would stay, and then they would engage.
Yeah,
whereas now,
most of the time, our guests stay for the whole show. We've had.
This was awesome.
We've had U.S. senators
and you know what? I
on the
missed
show.
that format.
We've had U.S. senators on the show. We've had drug smugglers from the 60s and 70s on the show. We've had one of the Black Tuna Gang.
Doctors. Lawyers.
Classroom, doctors, lawyers. In fact, I'm the co-host on Wednesdays with Higher Estate with Dr. Ira Price, who's a cannabis doctor here in Hamilton as well. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's fabulous, because I think that format should never have been abandoned, because now what do? The guests come, they do their spiel, and then they leave, and it's like you don't get that engagement.
You don't get a lot of
the talk shows.
you don't get multiple guests on his new show, but I'm enjoying David Letterman's show on Netflix that he did.
Oh, that one. Yeah, that's an interesting show as well. Yes, for sure. So anyway, I love your format, and I think it's great if the guests can stay and talk and engage.
That way we don't have to talk as much. And on that note, we'll say
That's right.
Folks.
I was just going to say, you're off the hook. You're the host who doesn't have to do the most. You can let everybody else talk.
There you go. Good night, guys.
Yeah. Okay, good night. Thanks very much.
Peace, love, and shit.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, thanks. I'll talk to you again.
Turn us off.
So what are you doing?
Stay on, brother.
Why not?
Are we off? Is he off? Did you turn it off?
Sounds like a cool website.
Yeah, it's all right. Oh, I might have it.
You might have it.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
The opinions expressed during this show are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of their associated organizations or Lifestyle Radio.